If you are looking for that sort of clarity, I would recommend reading some books.
And I would tell them about the plants, what they were good for, what ailments they could cure. So I told them, this is how it's going to be, and that's final. They have to understand.
It's great to see how much we've accomplished together.
Wow, actually, Nhat runs your eyes. Absolutely, the teamwork has been incredible.
So then I told him, we need to consider all the options carefully.
Absolutely. Rushing into a decision like this is never a good idea.
I agree. Thoroughness is key.
I know it's hard, but you'll get through this.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
I was telling him, you need to fix the roof before the rains come.
Yes, you are right.
So then, how do you see things moving forward from here with the project?
Well, I think the next step is definitely to finalize the budget.
The morning sun had barely climbed above the horizon when the old woman stepped out of her small house. Her frame bent slightly under the invisible weight that pressed against her shoulders. Her eyes, though dulled by age, carried a sharp awareness of the road ahead, a road not just of dirt and stone, but of debt, memory, and desperation. She pulled her shawl tighter around her, as if its frayed fabric could shield her from the storm that raged inside her heart. The path wound forward, narrow and uneven, leading toward the one man she believed could offer her a chance, however small, at redemption. She walked slowly, not because her will faltered, but because her body reminded her with every step that the years had not been kind. The debt of 15 million sat like an iron stone in her chest, an unrelenting number that invaded her thoughts every morning and stalked her dreams every night. 15 million. To some, it was a figure manageable with the stroke of a pen, but to her, it was a mountain of impossibility. Still, she clung to hope, the fragile kind that flickered like a candle in the wind, never fully extinguished, yet always threatened. The house came into view, looming larger with every step she took. Its roof rose above the trees, its walls weathered yet imposing, a reminder of the man who lived within, a man known for his stern demeanor, for his measured words, for debts that clung to families like shackles. She paused at the gate, her hands trembling as she pushed it open. The creak of its hinges sounded like a cry, echoing her fear. She swallowed hard, summoning what courage remained, and stepped inside. On the veranda, the old man sat waiting, or perhaps not waiting, for his eyes betrayed no anticipation, no curiosity at her presence. His hair was silver but neatly combed, his posture straight despite the weight of age. He looked at her with an expression that was not unkind but distant, like a mountain unmoved by wind or rain. She lowered her head in respect, her voice trembling as she greeted him, then slowly explained her request. She spoke of her debt, of the 15 million that bound her to him like an anchor. She spoke of her age, of her inability to do heavy labor, of her willingness to serve in his house, to sweep his floors, to cook his meals, to tend to the small tasks that filled each day. She asked not for wages, not for mercy, but for the chance to chip away at the mountain by giving what she could, her labor, her time, her dignity. Each word carried the weight of sleepless nights, of whispered prayers, of the quiet shame of borrowing without knowing how to repay. The old man listened in silence. His gaze never wavered, though the shadows in his eyes deepened. The wind rustled the trees around them, as if urging him toward compassion. But when he spoke, his voice was steady, flat, final. He told her he no longer needed help. His house was smaller now, his tasks fewer. The strength that remained in his body was enough to carry him through. He had no use for her service. The words struck her like a blow. For a moment, she thought she had misheard. That mercy still lay hidden beneath the calmness of his tone. But his eyes gave nothing away, his face carved from stone, and she understood. The hope she had carried, so carefully guarded on the long walk here, shattered into pieces too small to gather. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She bowed her head, murmuring thanks she did not feel, and turned away. Her steps across the courtyard were heavier than when she had arrived. Each one pulled her closer to despair, the gate seeming farther than ever. She clutched its frame when she reached it, steadying herself, her breath shallow and ragged. The world beyond the walls stretched vast and merciless, the road home long and unforgiving. She forced her body forward, though every muscle screamed with exhaustion, not from the walk, but from the crushing weight of failure. The trees that lined the path leaned close, their branches groaning as if mourning with her. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of earth and dust, and even the birds seemed to fall silent, their songs swallowed by the sadness that clung to her figure. She whispered to herself, half prayer, half lament, wondering how she could find the money, where she could turn when every door seemed closed. Her hands, once capable of carrying baskets of rice and bundles of firewood, trembled now at the thought of heavy labor. Her body, too frail to endure, betrayed her at every turn. She thought of her family, her son, Hang, who deserved more than a life chained to whispers of illegitimacy and rejection. She thought of her daughter-in-law, who bore her burdens without complaint, her quiet strength a light in the darkness. She thought of the small home they shared, modest yet filled with the warmth of love, now threatened by the storm of debt. Every memory pierced her like a blade, reminding her of what she stood to lose. Tears blurred her vision before she could stop them. She raised her hand to wipe them away, scolding herself. She had promised not to break, not to let her children see her collapse under the weight of her own despair. But here, alone on the path, she let herself crumble. Her sobs were quiet, swallowed by the wind, but they shook her frail body, bending her further until she seemed ready to fall. Still, she pressed on. Step by trembling step, she moved forward, because there was no other choice. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the road, and each shadow seemed to reach for her, to drag her deeper into darkness. Yet somewhere in the distance, faint and fragile, the outline of her home appeared. It was not wealth, it was not freedom, but it was hers. And in that moment, it was the only comfort she could cling to. As she neared the door, she straightened her back as best she could, forcing her grief deeper into her chest. She knew she could not shield her son forever, but she would try. She would try to keep the worst of her despair hidden, to bear the weight so that he might walk a little lighter. The thought gave her strength, a flicker of resolve against the vast night that threatened to consume her. And though her body trembled, though her heart felt shattered, the old woman lifted her head, preparing to face her family with what little dignity remained. For their sake, she would endure. For their sake, she would keep walking, no matter how heavy the burden grew. The small house felt colder than usual when she stepped inside. The old woman's face was pale, her eyes downcast, and though she tried to straighten her back, the weight of what had just happened clung to her like a shroud. Hang rose immediately, his instincts sharp, his gaze filled with questions he was almost too afraid to ask. His wife stood from the corner, her hands wiping nervously at her apron, already sensing that the silence that followed her mother-in-law through the door carried nothing good. She sat heavily, her bones aching from more than just the walk. For a long moment she said nothing, staring at the floorboards as if the answers might be carved there. Then slowly, she began to speak. The words fell reluctantly, as though each one carried a piece of her spirit. She told them how she had gone to the old man's house, how she had humbled herself, how she had asked only to serve in exchange for slicing away, little by little, at the towering debt that hung over them, and she told them how he had looked at her with eyes that did not bend, how his voice had cut her down with calm indifference, how he had refused her completely. Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Hang saw the shimmer of tears in his mother's eyes. Something inside him twisted. His fists tightened, his jaw clenched, and a storm began to rage in his chest. He had known hardship, had seen rejection, but to see his mother, the woman who had carried him through the leanest years, brought so low, it ignited a fury he could not contain. His wife placed a hand on his arm, murmuring his name, but it did little to ease the fire spreading through him. His mother tried to soften the blow, suggesting perhaps the old man no longer needed help. Perhaps it was not malice, but circumstance. Yet in her voice there lingered a suspicion that it was not work the man refused, but them, their blood, their very presence. That night, Hang could not sit still. He paced the floor like a caged animal, his breath uneven, his mind consumed. At last, he turned to his brother-in-law, Huang, who had come at his mother's request. "We go to him," Hang said, his voice low but shaking with determination. Not to beg, not to plead, to demand the truth. Huang studied him for a moment, then nodded. There was no hesitation, no fear, only solidarity. Together they prepared, and when dawn broke, they set out for the house that had already cast such a long shadow over their lives. The air was sharp, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. The world seemed to hold its breath as the two men approached the gates. Hang's hand trembled, but not from weakness, from the enormity of what he carried with him. In his pocket was the document, folded and worn from the number of times he had held it, studied it, traced the words with shaking fingers. It was proof, undeniable and precise, that the man they were about to confront was not just a creditor, not just an old figure looming on the edges of their lives, but his father. The old man received them on the veranda, just as he had received the old woman. His posture was unchanged, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. The silence between them stretched, a battlefield before the first strike. Hang did not bow, he did not soften his voice. He placed the paper on the table, his movements sharp, his breath loud in his ears. "This," Hang said, his voice breaking with intensity, "is the truth you cannot deny. I took the test. The blood does not lie. You are my father." The words shattered the silence, but the old man did not flinch. His gaze fell to the document, lingered for a heartbeat, then rose again to meet Hang's eyes. His face remained impassive, as though carved from stone. "Paper," he said at last, his voice calm, "is easily forged. Anyone can create what they wish to see. I do not recognize this. I do not recognize you." The calmness was more brutal than rage. Hang's chest heaved, his heart pounding against his ribs. He leaned forward, his voice rising. "You would deny your own blood. You would look at me, at your son, and tell me I am nothing to you? Do you not feel it? Do you not see it in my face, in my eyes?" But the old man shook his head slowly, his gaze never wavering. "I have nothing to admit, no secrets, no regrets. You are not my son. That is the end of it." The words cut deeper than any blade. Hang staggered, his knees nearly buckling. Rage and grief collided inside him, boiling over. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the courtyard, but the old man did not move. He might as well have been shouting at the mountain itself. Huang stepped forward, his own anger sharp, his voice fierce. "The test is real. You know it. This is not a lie. You are too proud, too afraid to face the truth." Still, the old man dismissed them with a wave of his hand, as though brushing away dust. His silence was more final than any shouted denial. Hang's vision blurred. He grabbed the paper, his hands trembling. For a moment he considered tearing it apart, shredding the only proof he had, but his grip froze. To destroy it would be to erase the last thread tying him to the truth, however fragile. He pressed it against his chest instead, his breath ragged. At last, with nothing left to say, he turned. His steps were uneven, his shoulders heavy, his entire body shaking with the effort of holding back the scream clawing at his throat. Huang followed, his eyes burning with fury, casting one last glare at the man who sat unmoved, untouched, unbroken by the storm he had unleashed. Behind them, the house loomed, its walls indifferent, its windows cold. The old man's figure blurred into shadow, as though he had never belonged to them at all. The path home seemed longer than ever, every step dragging like chains across stone. Hang walked in silence, his head bowed, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. The paper, now wrinkled and damp from the sweat of his hands, was tucked against his chest like a cruel reminder. He could still hear the man's voice in his mind, flat and final. "You are not my son. I will not recognize you." The words gnawed at him, echoing louder with every heartbeat until they seemed to replace the very sound of his breath. Huang walked beside him, his own face hardened with fury. He wanted to speak, to pour out the anger he carried, but he could see that Hang was drowning in silence, lost in a storm too heavy for words. So he stayed quiet, his presence solid, a shield against the emptiness that threatened to swallow his brother-in-law whole. When they reached the small house, the women rose quickly, their eyes searching, their hands twisting nervously in their laps. One look at Hang's face told them everything. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow, his skin pale with grief. He looked not like a man returning home, but like one carrying his own funeral on his back. The mother rushed forward first, her trembling hands reaching for her son's arm. "What happened?" she whispered, though she already knew. Her voice cracked with fear. "Tell me." Hang lowered himself onto the wooden bench, his body folding as though he no longer had strength to stand. He let the paper fall onto the table, its corners bent, its edges stained. For a long moment he said nothing. Then the words slipped out, rough and broken. "He denied me. Even with proof in his hands, he called it false. He said I am nothing to him. Nothing." The silence that followed was suffocating. The mother pressed a hand to her chest, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. She had feared this, had prayed against it, but hearing it aloud tore through her heart like fire. She shook her head, whispering, "No, no, my son. You are not nothing. You are everything to me." His wife knelt beside him, slipping her hand into his. Her grip was warm, steady, a lifeline in the storm. "You don't need him," she whispered, her voice fierce though her eyes were wet with tears. "You have us. You have this family. That is real. That is love. Don't let his denial erase what you already have." But Hang shook his head, his throat tight. "How can I not need him? He is my blood. I went to him not for money, not for inheritance, but for truth, for acknowledgement, for one word to tell me I belong to someone, and he couldn't give it. He refused." The mother leaned closer, her hands cupping his face, forcing his eyes to meet hers. "Look at me," she said firmly, though her tears fell freely. "You belong, you always have, to me, to your wife, to this home. A father who denies his own child is no father at all. You are not less because of him. You are more because you have endured what he could not." Hang's chest shook, his breath uneven, but the words settled deep, their truth like a faint light in the dark. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of his mother's hands steady him. Huang stood behind them, his voice carrying the edge of anger, but also the weight of care. "He is not worth your pain, Hang. That man has chosen pride over truth, fear over love. Let him rot in his denial. You have more here than he could ever give you." For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the quiet breathing of the child in the next room, innocent, untouched by the storms that raged in the hearts of the adults. That fragile sound became a lifeline, reminding them why they endured, why they clung to each other despite the world's cruelty. At last, Huang stepped toward the door. "I must leave," he said softly, "but I will return tomorrow. And when I do, I won't come alone." He paused, letting a small smile tug at his lips despite the heaviness in the room. "It's time you met my girlfriend. It's time she saw what family really means." The mother looked up, surprise flickering in her tear-filled eyes. Even Hang, broken as he was, lifted his head slightly, the faintest spark of curiosity crossing his face. "Yes," Huang continued, his voice firm, "you've carried enough sorrow. Tomorrow I'll bring something lighter, something brighter. Hope doesn't die just because one man refuses it." With that, he left, his footsteps fading into the night. The family remained together, their hands linked in quiet solidarity, their hearts still heavy but beating in unison. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying away the bitterness of rejection, leaving behind only the fragile promise of a tomorrow that might yet bring healing.